Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another AP World History reading, where today we are reading Chapter 9.5, Calls for Reform and Responses. So, let's dive right on into it. Quote, "We pledge ourselves to liberate all our people from the continuing bondage of poverty, deprivation, suffering, gender, and other discrimination." End quote. Nelson Mandela, 1918 to 2013. Essential question. How have social categories, roles, and practices changed and stayed the same since 1900? In the age of global economics, global transportation and communication, and global devastation from war, human rights were, for the first time, also elevated to the right of global discourse, which challenged long-held assumptions about race, class, gender, and religion. Efforts to establish and safeguard human rights opened doors of educational and professional opportunity and political participation for some who had previously been excluded. People sought liberation from the continuing bondage, in Nelson Mandela's terms, that had kept them in poverty. People around the globe also began to protest the inequalities and environmental damage that globalization had created or reinforced. An era of rights. In December of 1948, the United Nations laid the groundwork for an era of rights when it adopted a fundamental document, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, asserting basic rights and fundamental freedoms for all human beings. It stated that everyone is entitled to these rights without distinctions based on race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. The UN and human rights. Since its creation, the United Nations has promoted human rights, basic protections that are common to all people. As part of its humanitarian work, the UN created the United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund in 1946 to provide food for children in Europe who are still suffering more than a year after the end of World War II. In 1948, the UN formalized its position on human rights in the Universal Declaration. Since that time, the UN has investigated abuses of human rights such as genocide, war crimes, government oppression, and crimes against women. The International Court of Justice is a judicial body set up by the original UN Charter. It settles disputes over international law that countries bring to it. Also called the World Court, it has 15 judges and each must be a citizen of a different country. It often deals with border disputes and treaty violations. Another main aim of the UN is to protect refugees, people who have fled their home countries. In times of famine and natural disasters, people often leave their country and seek refuge in a safe location. Working through sub-agencies such as NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and the agency UNHCR, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, the UN provides food, medicine, and temporary shelter. Among the earliest refugees the UN helped were Palestinians who fled the disorder when the UN partitioned Palestine to create the State of Israel in 1948. Global feminism. On January 21st, 2017, the day after Donald Trump's inauguration as president, the Women's March on Washington drew about 500,000 demonstrators standing up for women's rights and other concerns. However, the march drew even more power from the millions more demonstrators who took part in locations on every continent around the globe, from Antarctica to Zagreb, Croatia, and from Buenos Aires, Argentina, to Mumbai, India. As many as 5 million people stood together that day representing a global solidarity for women's rights. That march was the most dramatic sign of global feminism, but other landmark events, such as since 1900, had done their part to solidify the movement. And as you can see here, there's a chart with landmark events in global feminism after 1900. Date March 1911. Event First International Women's Day celebration. Highlight 1 million demonstrators in Austria, Denmark, Germany, and Switzerland stand for women's rights. Date April 1915. Event Meeting of First International Congress of Women. Highlight Representatives from 12 nations, including the United States, attended. June 1975. Date Event United Nations First World Conference on Women. Highlight Representatives from 133 nations met in Mexico City and planned for the advancement of women over the next decade. Date December 1979. Event Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, also known as CEDAW or CEDAW. Highlight An International Bill of Rights for Women adopted by United Nations. Date September 1995. Event Meeting of Fourth International Congress of Women. Highlight Thousands of participants and activists met in Beijing, China, where then First Lady Hillary Clinton declared that women's rights are human rights. The 1979 Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women outlined many rights and protections that are cornerstones of global feminism. The right to vote and to hold office, the right to freely choose a spouse, the right to access the same education as men, the right to access family planning resources and birth control. Cultural and religious movements. Discourse on rights about also became part of cultural and religious movements. For example, the Negritude movement, which took root primarily in French West Africa, emphasized pride in blackness, the rejection of French colonial authority, and the right to self-determination. Leopold Sedar Senghor of Senegal wrote poems about the beauty and uniqueness of African culture and is now regarded as one of the 20th century most distinguished French writers. Senghor later served as first president of independent Senegal. During the 1920s and 1930s, American intellectuals such as W.E.B.D. Du Bois, Richard Wright, and Langston Hughes wrote movingly about the multiple meanings of blackness in the world. What many now refer to as Black Pride of the 1960s had its root in the Negritude movement. Inherent rights became a focus of religious ideology as well. Liberation theology, which combined socialism and Catholicism, spread through Latin America in the 1950s and 1960s. It had interpreted the teachings of Jesus to include freeing people from the abuses of economic, political, and social conditions. Part of this liberation included redistributing some wealth from the rich to the poor. In many countries, military dictators persecuted and killed religious workers who embraced liberation theology. However, advocates of liberation theology had a few notable successes. In Nicaragua, they helped a rebel movement topple a dictator and institute a socialist government. In Venezuela, President Hugo Chavez was deeply influenced by the movement. Then, in 2013, the Roman Catholic Church selected a cardinal from Argentina as pope, the first one from Latin America. The new leader, who took the name Pope Francis, reversed the Vatican's opposition to libertarian theology. Steps toward gender equality. During the 20th century, men and women made great strides toward securing some of their rights and participating more fully in professional and political life. In the first part of the century, the percentage of women who could read and who attended college increased, and in country after country, women won the right to vote. However, not all the women in a country won the right to vote at the same time. In the United States, for example, white women won the right to vote in national elections in 1920. Native American and African women did not have full voting rights throughout the country until the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Britain granted women the right to vote in 1918, but at first only women over 30 who met a property qualification could do so. British women did not achieve the same right to vote as men until 1928. In Australia, white women gained some voting rights in 1894, but Aboriginal men and women did not gain the same right to vote until 1962. And as you can see here, here's a chart with when women won the right to vote. Country, year. Country, New Zealand. Year, 1893. Country, Azerbaijan. Year, 1918. Country, Britain. Year, 1918. Country, United States. Year, 1920. Country, Brazil. Year, 1932. Country, Turkey. Year, 1934. Country, Japan. Year, 1945. Country, India. Year, 1947. Country, Morocco. Year, 1963. Country, Switzerland. Year, 1971. Country, Kuwait. Year, 2005. Country, Saudi Arabia. Year, 2015. As of 2018, only the tiny country of Vatican City did not allow women to vote. Whether women are able to exercise their vote is another issue. In Pakistan, women gained the right to vote in 1947. However, in 2013, women can cast only 10% of votes there. Steps toward racial equality. In the United States, African Americans won major victories against discrimination and segregation through the 1965 Civil Rights Act, which outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin, and the 1965 Voting Rights Act, which banned discrimination in voting. The federal government stepped in to protect the rights of all citizens. African Americans also sought equality of education through desegregation of schools. South Africa's colonial legacy. South Africa's system of apartheid, instituted in 1948, enforced the segregation of people based on race. Although white South Africans made up only 15% of South Africa's population, apartheid reserved good jobs and other privileges for them. So-called past laws required black South Africans to carry identity documents when entering areas set aside for whites, which they often had to do when traveling to their job. They were banned from living in certain areas of the country. Mixed marriages were prohibited. Although South Africa had 11 major languages, classes for blacks were taught only in Afrikaans, the language of many of the white South Africans who ruled the nation. These dehumanizing decrees marginalized the 85% of South Africans who were black, South Asian, or mixed race. The white-dominated South African government had its basis in European colonization of Africa in general and the Dutch and British colonization of South Africa in particular. The colonizers pushed the native people off the fertile lands and gave them no say in government. South Africans began to demand equal treatment. Quote, "I am not interested in picking up crumbs of compassion," end quote, said Desmond Tutu, Anglican Archbishop of Cape Town, South Africa, and human rights activist. Quote, "I want the full menu of rights," end quote. Challenges to apartheid. In 1964, Nelson Mandela, a leader of the African National Congress, ANC, was imprisoned for life for agitating against apartheid. The ANC's primary goal was to end white domination and create a multiracial South Africa. Mandela's imprisonment throughout the protests and throughout the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s inspired a global movement to end apartheid. Black protests in South Africa, which were often peaceful, were crushed violently by the government's forces. South Africa's reputation grew worse in the eyes of the global community. Musicians staged concerts calling for Mandela's release from prison. College students urged universities and corporations to divest from South Africa, and many countries voted for strict economic sanctions against the country. The United Nations expelled South Africa in 1974 because of its apartheid. As South Africa became a pariah state, undesirable state, in the 1980s, its leadership began to take notice. Mandela himself began negotiations with the government in 1986 while still in prison. In 1989, F.W. de Klerk became the nation's acting president. He recognized the need for change. Within 6 months, de Klerk announced Nelson Mandela's release from prison. Although euphoria was high in the weeks following Mandela's release, apartheid remained the law of the land. Police violence against protesters persisted, which stalled negotiations between Mandela and de Klerk. However, a series of reforms in the 1990s ended apartheid. In 1994, South Africa held its first free elections and rejoined the United Nations. The African National Congress won the majority of the seats in the parliament. The government of national unity was established with ANC members in the majority. On May 10, 1994, Nelson Mandela was sworn in as president, South Africa's first black leader. Uniting South Africa. Immediately, the Government of National Unity set up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC. Unlike the Nuremberg trials that sought retribution for crimes against humanity committed by Nazis during World War II, the TRC sought to restore and establish an atmosphere of trust in the new multiracial South Africa. The TRC organized a series of 19 public hearings designed to expose the truth of human rights violations that had occurred during apartheid, while at the same time granting amnesty to members of the apartheid regime who agreed to testify. And as you can see in this image above, here is the source where Nelson Mandela voted for the first time in 1994 at age 76. In that year, he was elected as President of South Africa. So as you can see there, that's actually Nelson Mandela. Alright, caste reservation in India. The fight for civil rights was also a global effort as people from different races and social classes began to demand equality. In India, the 1949 constitution outlawed discrimination against the Dalits, also known as untouchables. Pakistan outlawed discrimination against Dalits in 1953. Before then, many people believed that being touched by a Dalit required the person who was touched to undergo a cleansing ritual. People in India and Pakistan continued to discriminate against Dalits until well into the 21st century. To open the doors of opportunity to social groups or castes that had faced historical discrimination, the government of India established the caste reservation system. Through this system, the government guaranteed that a certain percentage of government and public sector jobs and enrollment in higher education would be set aside for people whose caste had conferred an underprivileged life. Human rights repression in China. After the economic reforms of the late 1980s and 1990s, China quickly became an economic powerhouse. The economic liberalization, however, was not matched by democratic reforms. The Chinese Communist Party, CCP, ruled the People's Republic with an iron fist. It censored the news industry and controlled what students were taught in primary and secondary schools. Such practices limited freedom of speech and thought. The CCP also required all non-state organizations and groups to register with the government. International non-governmental organizations, NGOs, were not free to operate in China unless they were willing to undergo strict regulation. Opposition political parties did not stand a chance in China's governing system, although some debate was allowed in the legislative process. Overall, however, the governing system was designed to thwart all challenges to the CCP's authority. How could the CCP have such power? The communists had controlled China since 1949. The government owned, controlled all industries. Government officials had killed or imprisoned those who had spoken out against previous government actions, such as the Great Leap Forward. Tiananmen Square. Chinese intellectuals and students had a history of protesting against their government based on the May 4th movement in 1919. In the spring of 1989, pro-democracy activists organized a public event mourning the death of a sympathetic high official. The protesters demanded a chance to speak with the Chinese leaders about freedom of the press and other reforms. After the Chinese government refused to meet with the activists, citizens in more than 400 Chinese cities staged sit-ins, refused to attend classes, and began hunger strikes. Hundreds of thousands of students, professors, and urban workers staged a massive protest in Beijing Tiananmen Square. After 7 weeks of protest, the government declared martial law. It sent troops armed with tanks and assault weapons into Beijing. Citizens responded by setting up barricades to block the troops. On June 4th, 1989, the army arrived in Tiananmen Square and attacked the unarmed protesters. The Chinese government claimed that nobody died in Tiananmen Square that day. No mention of the event was included in school texts, and the government blocked all websites that discussed the Tiananmen Square incident and human rights abuse in China. However, estimates by Amnesty International, the International Red Cross, and the New York Times indicated that anywhere from several hundred to a few thousand civilians were killed. As Chinese officials continue to describe the Tiananmen event as a Western conspiracy, Tiananmen mothers are prohibited from openly mourning family members who died in June 1989. The government still imprisons those who commemorate June 4th. Minority rights in China. The communist government in China has struggled with the demands of the nation's 55 ethnic minorities. Some prominent examples were calls by Tibetans for more autonomy or independence and the complaints of the Uyghur people concerning religious and political discrimination in the northwest province of Xinjiang. In 2011, some of the Mongolian people in China protested against the high number of Han Chinese who had moved into Inner Mongolia, an autonomous number of Han Chinese, an autonomous region of northern China, and disrupted their pastoral way of life. The Han are the largest ethnic group in China and worldwide. The Mongolians protested the environmental damage that came with settled agriculture, strip mining of coal, building of highways, damming of rivers, and overgrazing of land. Steps toward environmental repair. People realize that part of securing their rights in a globalized world is to claim their environmental rights to clean water and air and a sustainable planet with biodiversity. A number of organizations try to identify and achieve goals towards guaranteeing those rights. Earth Day. Starting in 1970, citizens in the United States designated April 22nd each year as Earth Day, a day for people to focus on environmental awareness. Organizers hope to highlight recycling, developing alternative energy, eating locally grown and organic foods, and passing anti-pollution legislation. Today, about 174 countries observe and participate in Earth Day activities with the Earth Day Network, an environmental advocacy group. Greenpeace. Founded in 1971 as an organization to advocate for the environment, Greenpeace grew into a multinational agency with offices in more than 55 countries. It battles deforestation, desertification, global warming, the killing of whales, and overfishing. Greenpeace has engaged in lobbying in education, but it became famous for its direct actions, such as confronting whaling boats in the ocean. Green Belt Movement. In 1977, Kenyan activist Wangari Maathai founded the Green Belt Movement, a direct response to the environmental degradation resulting from the colonial experience. Women in rural Kenya were reporting that streams were drying up and their food supply was unpredictable. The Greenbelt movement helped women work to plant trees to improve the soil and collect rainwater. More than that, however, Dr. Mathai and the Greenbelt movement helped women see their capacity for making changes through participation in public life rather than leaving decisions to others. And as you can see by the source to the right, in 2004, Mathai won the Nobel Prize for Peace, becoming the first African woman to do so. Quote, "We are called to assist the earth to heal her wounds and in the process heal our own," end quote, she said. Steps toward economic fairness. To counterbalance the strictly commercial interests of the powerful World Trade Organization, see topic 9.4 or my previous video, organizations from around the world combined resources to create the World Fair Trade Organization, or WFTO, in 1989. Member organizations subscribe to the following 10 principles of fair trade, and the WFTO monitors its members to make sure they follow these principles. And as you can see here, World Fair Trade Organization Principles of Fair Trade. 1. Creating opportunities for economically disadvantaged producers. Number 2. Transparency and accountability. Number 3. Fair trading practices. Number 4. Payment of a fair price. Number 5. Ensuring no child labor and forced labor. Number 6. Commitment to non-discrimination, gender equality, and freedom of association. Number 7. Ensuring good working conditions. Number 8. Providing capacity building. Number 9. Promoting fair trade. And number 10. Respect for the environment. Key terms by theme. Society leaders and thinkers. Nelson Mandela, Negritude, Leopold Senghor, and Singer. Pope Francis, Liberation Theology, W.E.B. Du Bois. Desmond Tutu, F.W. de Klerk. Wangari Maathai, Environment Actions, Earth Day, Greenpeace, Green Belt Movement, Government United Nations, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund, or UNICEF, International Court of Justice, Government Power and Control, Human Rights, Refugees, Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, Apartheid, Pass Laws, African National Congress, ANC, Pariah State, Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC, Dalits, Caste Reservation System, Tiananmen Square. And ladies and gentlemen, that does it for today's read-along. So today for the chapter and the essential question, and I'm going to repeat it, how have social categories, roles, and practices changed and stayed the same since 1900? Well, for one, I'm going to have you guys take a look at that, but keep in mind that some of these are still in effect to this day. And also, some of these you might see in modern times. However, you may want to try thinking about this in case you see this on an SAQ prompt, or a question on your AP World test, or in case you're just wanting to try answering your own questions. However, I think that's going to do it for today. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Please like the video, subscribe, hit the like button, once again as I just repeated, and then hit the notification bell to stay up to date when I post future content. However, I do hope you stay safe, stay happy, and remember, ladies and gentlemen, stay entertained.